a suspension of the trade to Indonesia and the lodging of bills in federal parliament to ban this cruel trade. Please welcome Lynn White. Good morning. And firstly, can I say how grateful I am to each and every one of you for being here today. There have been times over the past 8 years when I've been standing in Middle Eastern slaughterhouses and marketplaces that I felt like I was the only Australian who cared about our animals. But the reality is that that's never been the case. They have never left the hearts and minds and consciences of caring Australians who are appalled by this trade. And were those animals able to look down on Australia today, they would see a sea of compassion and action on their behalf that would restore their faith in the country that was meant to protect them from harm. Every animal welfare organisation in the world opposes Australia's live export trade, and with good reason. Transporting animals halfway around the world only to be slaughtered is unethical and unacceptable. Supplying animals to countries where there are no laws to protect them from cruelty is quite simply immoral. The animal victims of this trade now number more than 160 million. This is a huge and tragic figure. But what is also tragic is that it is so easy for some to forget that each one of these animals was a living, breathing being who suffered unnecessarily as a result of live export. Were even a single one of these animals able to tell us what they endured, I have no doubt we would not be here today. Live export would have ended long ago. If you detect passion in my voice today, it's because I have stood in Middle Eastern slaughterhouses at 2 in the morning watching our animals brutalised. I have followed truckloads of sheep in Oman being forward shipped for 15 hours in 45-degree temperatures and watched these animals as they succumb, exhausted and heat stressed one by one. I have stood in front of workers in a Dubai marketplace to stop them from throwing Australian sheep 3 metres through the air like bags of wheat. And I have stood in Indonesian slaughterhouses for 6 consecutive nights, witnessing a level of brutality to animals that I hoped I would never see from our fellow human beings. Most of the countries that we export to have no laws to protect animals from cruelty, and where they do, they are not enforced. And most of these countries haven't yet even acknowledged that animals and their welfare matter. And why would they, when a country such as Australia is prepared to send animals halfway around the world only to be slaughtered? It sets the worst possible example. I have witnessed that the culpability of this trade extends far beyond supplying animals to be cruelly treated. By providing animals, we have actually reinforced local views that their treatment of animals is acceptable. Rather than inspiring change, this industry has been directly responsible for ensuring that change does not occur. No one is more passionate than me about improving animal welfare in the Middle East and in Indonesia after witnessing the terrible suffering there. And if our politicians are truly wanting the same thing to occur, then they need to acknowledge the inherent example that the live trade sets. And that is that it is acceptable for animals to suffer and die in transport as part of daily business, and that Australia as a nation is prepared to put to one side our long-established ethical principles as to how animals should be treated for the sake of profits on offer in another country. This is not an example that is going to inspire an awakening as to a nation's ethical responsibilities to animals, when so clearly our own nation has abandoned ours. I have to say that when I've seen Australian animals cruelly treated, the vast majority of my anger is directed towards industry groups, Meat and Livestock Australia, and the exporters themselves, because what has been shown so clearly by the evidence across 9 different investigations is that they are willing to supply animals to countries regardless of how happening there. Once again, we documented horrendous slaughter practices. Conscious animals being lifted by a chain around their rear leg, hoisted into the air for their throats to be cut. And now we are exporting hundreds of thousands of animals to Turkey. But we shouldn't be surprised, because this is the same industry that was prepared to supply nearly 1 million cattle to Egypt, knowing full well that it was routine practice for them to have their legs in and slashed and eye stabbed because they were prior to slaughter. This terrible admission in itself would have been enough to have live export banned in 2006. And had the government done so, millions of sheep would have been saved from suffering in the Middle East and millions of cattle from brutal treatment in Indonesia. Australians will never forget nor forgive the Australian Life Paid's complicity and culpability in animal cruelty in Indonesia. Of Indonesia. Australians have had the suffering of our animals in that country indelibly imprinted in our hearts and minds. And I doubt whether one single animal has ever had a greater impact than one beautiful black steer that we called Tommy, who nearly all of Australia has seen standing alone, trembling and terrified, eyes wide open with fear, as he watched his mates being slaughtered. In that moment, he revealed to us that he completely understood what was happening to him, and each one of us felt what he was going through. He will never be forgotten. Tommy and all of these other animals who have suffered so dreadfully as a result of this pain will have justice is if, as a result of this enormous ethical betrayal, this pain is banned. Indonesia has become the catalyst that has pushed this cruel trade to the brink of extinction. And that is because good people like you expressed their horror and disgust and outrage to the federal government and spoke as one voice. And as a result, caring politicians such as Adam Bandt responded by putting legislation forward to ban the live trade. This is the power of our voice, and why I don't doubt that if Julia Gillard was to allow a conscience vote on Thursday and free politicians up from party policy, that we would see an end to live export, which is why we must make the most of every moment leading up to Thursday to call on her and Tony Abbott to allow this to go to a conscience vote. During my years policing and since as an animal advocate, I have seen so clearly the huge advantage that we have over animals, simply because we have a language that we can understand and we can call out for help. The fact that animals cannot and that they cannot tell us what they're enduring is used mercilessly against them by the live trade.
Yes.
I've often felt that if a single animal, as they were being loaded onto these ships, could turn and say, "Don't abandon me. Please, I don't want to go," they would reach even the most hardened conscience with the wrongs of this trade. Some 200 years ago, another shipboard trade in living beings was defended on the same basis, on the basis of profits and the schoolyard defence If we don't do it, someone else will. This terrible trade and the victims of this trade were also considered lesser beings. It took the extraordinary efforts of British politician William Wilberforce and his supporters to end the slave trade in Britain and to awaken a nation to the fact that profits should never come at the cost of our ethics and that acknowledging the interests of others, no matter how different they may be from us, is at the very core of human morality. It should be no surprise that this great man also founded the SPCA in Britain. You know, every civilising step in human history has been opposed and ridiculed before being accepted as self-evident. Human ethics have only continued to evolve because people in each generation, wonderful people just like you, have refused to accept being different as a justification for cruelty and for indifference, causing unnecessary suffering to innocent living beings who, just like us, feel fear and pain simply because we have the power to do so can never be right, and deep down every Australian knows this.